Okay. Good evening, everyone. So, for today's, I wanted to explore this, or reveal something about what's been going on for me in a pretty general puzzle. This this business of um, how do I actually help good things happen in the world? Um, I ended up having a brief exchange with someone who had PM'd me, mentioning, hey, this has been a pretty big puzzle for me, and I'm like, how do I? I'm curious about your thoughts about how to orient to, well, there's something to be said about doing our own inner work. So I'm realizing I'm being very abstract. Let me try to ground this a lot more. I spent uh, about a decade, about the last decade of my life, I think you could say it was, well, except last year. The last year has been weird, but the decade prior to that is largely devoted to finding ways to fix the world. And arguably the last year has been a lot of that flavor too. That's been an underlying theme that's been driving really most of my life. How do I make the world work? um, when Up until my 20s, the main focus was actually, this is probably going to throw a bunch of people for a loop if they don't already know about this. But a bunch of the focus was actually, how do I end aging? How do we get rid of this psychosis that acts like it doesn't matter or it's secretly something good? Or if it's not, if it's, or that it's an implausible problem to approach, so we might as well not talk about it. Um, like it's a form of insanity. I still hold that. I'm still very clear about that. I think there's a clear way that the human race is deeply confused about this issue. But then later I changed tracks and I looked at it and went, okay, it seems like the problem is not specifically about aging. The problem is the ability to reason when we're sort of, the way I would say it now is when we're possessed by memes that distort our perceptions and our priorities. So I threw 7 years into co-building and to some extent co-running a company that, like the Center for Applied Rationality, it was all about how do we get people to think good. At least nominally, that's what it was about. I don't, in practice, looking back, I don't think that was the real drive. But it was definitely a lot of mine. It's definitely a lot of mine, and I think a lot of the people involved were seriously intending something like that. But the driving theme has long been this business of, like, sort of my not quite an elevator pitch, but sort of like, I don't know, like a 3 elevator rides pitch. Goes something like, we keep collecting all of these dramatic problems on a species-wide level, like massive political polarization and climate change and AI risk and the mounds of garbage floating in the oceans and like all kinds of problems that we keep creating, and we keep not being able to solve them. And the answer can't be that we've got to band together around a solution and just agree and move forward, because most of the difficulty we are having is in the ability to agree on a solution. Like there's still debate about whether climate change is real. It's really hard to get past that point. Sorry, changing language. It's really hard to get to the point of enacting a collective solution if we can't even agree there's a problem. Or if there is a problem, that there's anything to do about it. It sounds suspiciously like the issue with aging, but we'll ignore that. So the solution for having a functional species clearly can't be because we agree on the answer and then push that forward. Because what do you do with the people who disagree? Well, clearly they're wrong, so you should shame them into oblivion or put pressure on them or inform them. You could inform them because people will listen to arguments and either change their mind or be condemnable. like, because no one says this, but in practice, that's what happens. I mean, today you look at, like I'm mostly surrounded by people who lean pretty strongly towards anti-Trump, and that's been true for pretty much the whole time Trump has been a Trump. Like it's been a thing in American culture, and in most of the circles, not exclusively, I've known a number of people who have supported Trump, but for the most part, the dominant voice that I hear from the anti-Trump folk has this tone of, yeah, Trump voters, because they're too stupid to blah, 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 or yeah, they're inconsiderate or selfish, or there's something wrong with them, or here are these studies. And there's something like, what is that thinking and way of talking do to actually address the disagreement? Nothing. It doesn't do anything. It just, it lets you feel better about what side you're on, I guess. Maybe you're right. Does it matter? No, but it sure feels, that's not quite true. It does matter because it creates meaning. We are in a world that is starved of meaning. So, well, it's culturally in the habit of starving itself out of meaning. It's sort of like being at this huge banquet and then insisting that, well, I have an allergy to that and to that and to that, but if you could just like send this back to the kitchen and make it so that the cake has no sugar or flour in it or anything white, then I might be able to eat it. If only my parents would love me. I'm like, okay, right. I think there's a reason for the starvation. So anyway, that's its own tangent. So just, to me, there's something crystal clear about we can't solve these problems by trying to agree on a solution and then pushing it. There's something much more basic that's got to shift. And that's been the main thrust, and I've been refining this thrust for a long time. And the stuff I was talking about with Wise Knowing, mostly in August, was a strike of, okay, I think this makes sense. This structure, it holds, it's mathematically correct. It seems to me that if we can tweak it so that it can work in human systems, and I think it can, I have evidence that it can, it's like if we can get this to tweak, then this can go at a super exponential rate and spread across the world, and we can have a good world. Yay, I think I've got the solution. There's still a much more basic problem. This is something that's become really clear to me. It was tickling me in the back of my mind even while talking about it back in August. And I couldn't quite see how to address it, and I still don't exactly know. But not knowing is okay. The issue is, one way to articulate what the wide-scale problem is that people are trying to manipulate each other into a certain frame. I was trying to get around that by saying, well, this isn't manipulation, I'm trying to be very clear. But there's still this idea, there's still this energy in the background that I was holding of, well, but we've got to pull out of this or we're going to all burn, and we've got to change everyone. We don't, I mean, and I was being logical about it, saying, well, of course we can't change everyone, and I don't think we need to, and here's the logic of it, and I still think the logic is correct. But the business of how to get enough people on board with a meta-type perspective that can actually address political polarization, actually address climate change, actually address massive wealth inequality, actually address the insane amounts of garbage we have orbiting the Earth that's slowly making it harder and harder for us to be able to do anything in space ever. I mean, they're all the same problem. They're all exactly the same problem. It's our unwillingness to look at certain parts of reality being reflected back to us. I wrote an essay about this that I thought, there's a part of me that's like, how is this getting zero traction? This is really weird. I think I now understand why. But I see your question, Daniel. Daniel's asking, why is it not my job? Why is it not everyone's job? Yeah, I'll get to that. I totally will. Uh, and what he's referring to is the text that I have describing the entry of this. But anyway, that'll be there so you can take a look at it. Yeah, so I just lost my train of thought a little bit here. That was my own fault. So when trying to motivate a lot of other people to do something, yeah, sorry, the thread. The thread was, I was highlighting in this essay how there is no away. Like, this is usually an environmentalist thing of when you throw something away, remember there is no away. And I was tracking that and noticing, there's actually a very particular sensation that is faith in a way. Usually, one of the in practice problems with environmentalism, which speaks to the thing that I'm talking about here, is that environmentalism often carries with it, regardless of the intent of, well, whatever, add caveats however you want to, but one of the reasons environmentalism gets a backlash is because it comes with a sort of emotional carrier wave that is about shame or obligation. And people don't like that. There's kind of a self-consciousness in my part. I've been watching some videos from Perry Chase, and now I'm noticing, I'm adopting some of her mannerisms. That just happens when I watch people a little bit. But if you ignore the obligation flavors of the environmentalist thing, and you just look at, well, remember there is no away. That isn't to say don't throw anything away, like you're adding to the problem. But there's this subtle thing of, I notice this subtle thing of when I throw something into the trash, if I'm not paying attention, there's a thing in my energetic system and sort of my emotional orientation to everything that treats it like it's out of existence. Right? I put it in there, and then my mind turns off to what that means. Okay? There's what I'm doing is putting off. I guess you could say one way to put it would be that I am I'm giving the responsibility of that to someone else, but I'm doing so in a way that I don't even care who is responsible for it. It just goes away. That's basically the whole problem. That's it. That if any of us are, well, not any, but to the extent that I am putting faith in away, it's like faith in later. Like, I'll take care of that later. Like, let me just put this away. Well, I mean, putting things away is often putting it where it belongs, but like, let me throw it away. Let me get rid of it. Get rid of it where? If it's not actually demolished into something basic that can be integrated into the rest of everything, then what does that actually mean? Like, when you throw away some plastic, typically that plastic is going to live for a very long time in a dump. What does that do? Well, there's some guilt associated with it, so maybe I won't look. So let me grab the environmentalist example to highlight the mechanism that I'm focusing on here. Even if the standard environmentalist narrative is right, let's just grant that, since there's a lot of debate about the details. Let's just go, okay, we all need to take care of the earth. We need to go to a cyclic economy, because the linear economy we have, where we take resources, we convert it into something that will last forever in a way that Mother Nature doesn't know how to deal with. We'll use it once and then we'll throw it away, or we'll create planned obsolescence and then we'll throw our phones in the trash or whatever, and then just go, "Beh, whatever, not my problem." And then this creates all kinds of havoc, that our energy economy doesn't make any sense because we're throwing all this carbon in the air. Let's just grant this picture. Okay. There's a problem with the entire approach of let's solve this by convincing everyone of this picture and prescribing an action pathway to solve it. Which is, well, what do you do about all the people who aren't ready to hear that. Okay? It's suspicious that the answer is beat them over the head with this message more. Okay? Insist that, apply social pressure. Let's create laws. Let's add threats. There's something very strange going on here about, well, why? Why is that? Why should that be the way in which we encourage compliance? I'm noticing intellectually that the direction I'm going in is going a little into the weeds as a method of getting to the place that I want to nail. What I'm saying is right. Okay? There's a problem with this mechanism that will systematically create an issue. But I want to emphasize, from my own lived experience, and from what I observe in how the world works, what I keep seeing over and over again is that the attempt to fix that mechanism in the world doesn't work. It doesn't work over and over and over again. There's an empirical element to it, just an experiential. I guess technically it's anecdotal rather than empirical, if you want to be really precise with the language. But there's also a mechanical, intellectual reason to think that it's not going to work. It's a little slippery to track because minds that believe in the fiction are often extracting meaning from it. If you think about trying to convey this approach to environmentalism is never going to work. It's just never going to work. Right? Because the contraction that this creates in the people who aren't already on board isn't going to be addressed by yelling at them and shaming them and threatening them. It's not going to be corrected by trying to manipulate them into a different perspective. The energy that goes into trying to do that is part of what their system is reacting to. So that approach will never solve the problem. It just creates factions in more culture wars. That's all it can do. You might make some progress, some nominal progress in some areas. Oh, hey, look, now everybody's recycling. But you know what? It doesn't actually matter if everyone recycles because we don't have the foundation of the economic shift needed to create a circular economy and all of that recycling. Like I recently found out that supposedly, there's a problem with getting good information today about anything, but supposedly it sounds as though plastic may have never been recyclable in any form. And that the reason that there is this myth of recyclable plastic, and there are these other kinds of plastic that aren't as recyclable, is because of basically lobbying from plastics. I don't know if that's true, but it's the type of thing that keeps happening. It's the type of mechanism that keeps happening. Greenwashing is a big issue. As environmentalism became a more popular matter for people to have a way of discharging guilt, greenwashing became a thing in the world. As for corporations to say, hey, look, we are now, for our plastic bottled water, we're now using smaller lips for our bottles to make them more eco-friendly because they're using less plastic. Like, if you're bothering modeling anything about why plastic is a problem for this whole picture, the size of the bottlenecks does not matter. What matters is people are buying bottled water. That's the issue. And of course, we should solve that by shaming people away from buying bottled water, right? Right? So this whole manipulating everyone trying to manipulate one another. Oh, I'm not trying to manipulate, or maybe I am there. Let me do my work so that I'm not manipulating these people now. So that I'm not manipulating these people now so that they'll do what I think is an important thing to do. Like that whole chaotic system, like that, we're never going to fix that. Not that way. We can't come up with a right policy. We can't come up with a right strategy and push it, it's never going to work. For environmentalism, for politics, for any of it, it's never going to work. It can make things move around. Very much like we have not solved war, but that doesn't mean war doesn't do anything. It seems to move, it seems to change country boundaries and leadership, and definitely affects a bunch of people. Right? I'm not saying that these don't do anything, but the problems won't be solved this way. And in fact, they're going to keep getting worse as long as we keep doubling down on this meta strategy. So that's looking at the large picture. To me, those are just true facts about the game board. So when I'm reflecting on what is mine to do, what's mine to do, I keep noticing this very strong pull toward, I want to make this game good. And I'm going to make everybody do something that I think is good. And there's a basic problem with that, which is that I'm playing into the same meta strategy when I do that. So if I really simplify it, what I think the basic problem is on a global scale, the core issue, the central thing that needs to shift in order for us to have a good future instead of a dead future. The core issue is that we, individually and collectively, and those two are in some important sense the same, but we are making decisions unconsciously. We aren't paying attention to why we're making the decisions we're making. This is different from having justifications. This is different from thinking it through. This is not about thinking. This is about noticing the actual motivations for what we're doing. If we collectively make a shift, I think this is what spiritual folk, the ones who aren't made of cotton candy and fluff, when they're talking about increasing consciousness or a transformation in consciousness, this is, I think, a big chunk of the in practice what they're talking about. This whole business of actually paying attention to what the causes are of my impulses, my behavior, my beliefs. And if we do that in a milieu of, oh, this is what's driving me, then the ways that we want to interact change. If you come from that, it's possible to notice things like the disrespect that comes from looking at another human being and saying, I know how you should live your life better than you do. We don't usually phrase it that way, but having the tone of, oh, you need to do this. Oh, you're suffering? Here's what you need. I mean, what if we lived like everyone was an adult making their own decisions? I mean, if we like snap the fingers, everybody's doing that. I actually think this would kill a lot of people because we don't have I want to say something like the energetic awareness, the level of consciousness needed to do that yet. Okay. It's also possible that that would be the fastest path to getting there. I don't know. So let's see. David Swedlow says, meditations on resentment-based ego that we outgrew when we finally love our self/selves as the conscious universe that we are. Yeah. I agree that the subject of that sentence, that is a sentence that consists of a subject, and I like a lot of that tone. Yeah. One way in practice I think about it is that I am a cell in a very large organism, namely existence. And in that sense, I am also existence. And so it doesn't make a lot of sense for me to ignore the larger context I'm embedded in. But how can I make that something that isn't a thought? How can I make that something that I live? But in practice, I suspect that that way of asking the question and approaching it, and this is actually a shift I think I've made since August. I seem to remember in August I was emphasizing, hey, there's this frame, and then it's a matter of getting it into the body. I think if that frame gets into the body, some good stuff happens. But I think saying, this is the frame that needs to enter the body is doing things a little bit backwards. I mean, sorry, I don't know how general that is, but I've discovered that to be very true of me. I had to come at it to deepen it from a very different angle. So anyway, I'm noticing a meandering from the main thrust, so I'm going to shift back now. So even at the very simple level of when I look at somebody who's in my life, like my father, or my girlfriend, a friend who, like there's a friend who we were trying to coordinate earlier today, and he seemed really stressed out about the way that his computer had difficulty. And I'll get these ideas of, oh, I bet it would be easier for you if... It's not that there's something wrong with offering people things that help their lives to be better. But I notice that if I don't prioritize absolutely at the very top of the list, why am I trying to do things to and for them? If I'm not aware of that as the first and foremost focus, then my habits, which sure I've inherited, but I have them, my habits of manipulation and trickery and getting my needs met and by getting others to meet them in ways that they might not want to if they were fully conscious of the full picture, and the tone of rolling around in Cartman's triangle, the victim triangle, and playing something like the rescuer or the victim or the perpetrator. This is a wonderful model that if you haven't taken a look at it, consider this a nudge to look at Karpman's triangle or the drama triangle. So all my habits for doing all of that kind of stuff slip in exactly where I'm not looking. And then I'm busy living this internal world that I'm not noticing I'm living, that I need other people to do specific things for me to be okay. And that becomes my existence. And I might be thinking correct thoughts about, oh, you know what you need? You need to look at Cartman's triangle so that you can fix this part of your behavior. Just trying to, like, noticing where... There's something very slippery about the why behind each utterance, behind each movement, that if I don't pay attention to, I really muck up the clarity with which compassion could come through. I know a lot of things, and I'm a very perceptive person. I have this library in my mind, and it just brings up all kinds of things that can be meaningfully, deeply helpful for people. I can see exactly the ways that, like, oh, well, if you had this piece of information, I think your life would really flourish. And I love sharing that stuff. But when is it about, hey, look at how smart I am. Look at how much I can save you. When that energy comes through, the compassion can't land cleanly. Some people are going to recoil from it. Some people are going to accept it. That's just as bad. Because now I've got somebody who is benefiting from my gifts in a way that is, oh, thank you, I wasn't able to do this. And now you're giving me this piece, and so you are my savior. Like, I'm just fed into this story where, ah, yes, I am your savior, and you're this being that needs saving. And then we can have another group of people step in going, hey, you're not respecting this person. You should respect them. Like, it's just this wild clusterfuck every time. Every time I step into this co-manipulative world, often I don't notice. I just notice when I wake up a little bit more and I realize where I am and I look around. I'm covered in dirt and filth. And I kind of have to wash it off of my being, right? Right? So this is a question of what way of being can I bring such that my compassion can actually meet the world? Is there even a way to ask that question in a way that can cleanly land? I think the answer is yes, but it can't come from prioritizing that question, at least at first, or something like at first. I also want to emphasize that this is an area where this is really slippery for me. I see it with a lot of mental clarity. And I keep noticing after a bit, I kind of shake my head and then I have a bunch of dirt on me. I see Elise Krohn says, as an environmental activist by degree and training, I do get what you were saying, but it can also be a circular argument coming up with the one right way to address plastics, planetary degradation, species loss, etc. Don't shame people. Instead, encourage consciousness of root of decision trees also can become a manipulation. I agree. I agree. That's exactly what I'm talking about. The whole mess is borked. The question of how do we do activism in a way that can possibly do good things for the species? That's a really hard question. It's vastly harder than almost any activists recognize. It's not just a matter of, can we forward this cause? I totally believe Greenpeace is doing some things that are meaningful for advancing the metrics that they're attending to. But if activism isn't addressing the consciousness, it's making the global problem worse, even if it's advancing the specific area of environmentalism or digging wells for people in Africa or like I don't know, dealing with AI risk. Like in a deep way, it really doesn't matter, because if we make progress in a given area via some version of coercion, whether the coercion is feel guilty if you don't agree with us, or if it's you should increase your consciousness, doesn't matter. If it's coercion based, there's a problem where on net, it's like in a human body, in an individual human body, when we consume something that creates inflammation, the inflammation tends to beget more inflammation. It tends to create these chains. This is one of the problems with free radicals. Free radicals tend to encourage inflammation, and inflammation tends to be bad for metabolism in lots of ways. Contraction does something like the role of inflammation on the group level and on the species level. So if we successfully make an advance in an area via contraction, but the problem, if the cause of the problem is there's too much contraction in the species, people are scared, people are traumatized, people are in situations where they don't trust each other, they don't know how to trust themselves, they kind of hate themselves, but they won't admit that consciously in a bunch of cases. Instead, they'll try to pursue all kinds of things. Like the whole thing is just insane. Right? The question of what is an activism that would actually help the species? That's a deep question. It's actually a really deep question. Daniel says, so teach things to the wise knowing thereof. Yeah, so if I have a punchline to what I'm saying, this seems like, I think I mentioned this in the lead up to the whole, this thing, the text I wrote to open up this. I think the priority for each person has got to be on themselves in order for this to work. But that's the systems level. In practice, in the spirit of me looking at what is mine, what's my work? I don't know what your work is. I have a guess, and here I'm describing the guess because I'm trying to describe the systems level. And this is one of the big struggles for me. My mind is so good at seeing the systems level of things that that if I let it run, I often forget I, as a lived experience, am part of this system. It's like my left brain just kind of runs off. It's like an overpowered supercomputer that I've hooked up to too many of my senses. But what's mine to do? I don't think what's mine to do is to prioritize teaching. I notice I bring myself forward, and my own process. Like earlier today, I mentioned I was listening to a video of Perry Chase's, and in there was a particular thing that really struck me about what it means to show up in offering what I have to give to people. That if I'm doing that, she didn't quite say it this way, this is what I took from it, that if I show up in a way that is to offer things to others that is separate from my own process of being clear, of healing any trauma, of opening, if it's a separate thing, I open so that I can give, or I open and then as a separate motion I give, then what I'm feeding into is the same thing that caused my contraction in the first place. So in order for me to live a good life, I need to focus on me, on enjoying my life, including the wide span of I'm looking at, well, what world do I want to live in? Okay. But not, what do I need other people to do? I don't have control over other people. Right? They're, in theory, doing the same thing for themselves. Not consciously for the most part. I'm not fully conscious. But I can pay attention to how to live my life well. How to really show up consciously for why am I making the choices I'm making? Are my choices making my life harder? Not just in terms of senses, not just in terms of convenience, but in terms of if I check in with truth, with my own sense of inner knowing, am I moving in a direction that has me living my life well? And that direction, if I keep answering yes, 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 no, oh that was not something I wanted to do. This direction, yeah, that's yes, 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 yes. If I keep following that path, I mean, for me, I find it very fulfilling to share what I have to offer. But whether others benefit from it is up to them, not me. If I can stay clear about that, then what I have to offer is a lot cleaner. I keep trying to move in that direction, but I'm finding very increasingly that to the extent that I can actually come from that space, what I have to say is a little more confronting and a lot easier to receive. And a lot easier to reject, like for people who are just like, oh, that's what he's saying? No, 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 no. Okay, cool. I'm not for you. So I would say that I don't think the goal, so again, popping to a systems perspective, I don't think the goal can be to teach per se. I think that for each individual, to the extent that this lands, if what I'm seeing is actually systemic, it would be for each person to prioritize themselves and stop pretending that they have anything to do with other people's ability to take care of themselves. It's like a straw man of my statement there that is obviously false. But I mean, focus on the true thing, if you want to hear what I'm saying. So I see Elise answered about some of the environmental stuff here. I feel we are all in this environmental crisis and grappling, but everyone's grappling is needed. Some start protesting, some sit in trees, some become lawyers and fight that way, and some like you are addressing consciousness. All are needed. I love what you were saying. Yeah. Yeah, it's a little bit like when a body is getting inflammation, the tissues are doing the right thing. They're inflaming correctly in response to free radicals, and definitely what's needed is for the whole system to make some sort of different kinds of choices. So yeah, we need different things at different levels, and part of what I'm um, yeah, I think we agree, and we're looking at we're looking at something from different angles, and I want to be clear about the angle that I'm looking at. Importantly, says that the things about protesting and sitting in trees and so on actually becomes not just unnecessary, but actually anti-helpful after a certain point, and that point is as soon as we decide we're there. So, which is not to say that those movements are invalid or irrelevant. It's a necessary growth stage. But when I'm looking at the whole scale of consciousness, it seems to me that there's a basic thing where, I think it's worth taking a moment and highlighting what I mentioned before, something I picked up from John Vervaeke. He refers to the meaning crisis. It's a beautiful series called Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. You have to really love academic learning to dive through that series, but he is a brilliant lecturer if you have a mind for that kind of thing. I totally do, and I really enjoy it. And it's something that there are some brilliant people that I would never recommend they actually sit through this for. Like my sister is insanely brilliant, immensely perceptive, and I will never recommend that she watch that series. I tell her about it. I'm happy to share bits, and she's happy to hear about them, and she can totally understand them, but she'll never read it. She'll never watch it, just because her mind, and energetic orientation is different. But there's this problem that, particularly the West, but because the whole world is kind of westernized, this is or certainly the factors that are playing on the global scale, like all the environmental concerns and the stuff about AI and all that, definitely westernized. So, and part of the reason that's been able to happen is because of the Western scientific revolution. But the Western scientific revolution is the heir of our destruction of our methods of making meaning. Like if you go back 1,000 years, you imagine that you're a European in Christendom. Like they didn't call I don't think they called it Europe at the time. Like Christendom was a known thing. Like you had a priest who did magic. You just accepted that he does magic. What magic does he do? Well, every week you go to Mass, and he incants in a language that you, or enchants. He speaks. He speaks in a language that you don't know. Like most people don't know Latin, just the clergy does. But you're told, and you can sort of feel, like you walk into this space, and this is one of probably the best taken care of, richest buildings in your town or village or whatever it is, the church. And in this space, magic is performed where you are having communion with God. You are given this wafer and wine in a way that is having you actually take in the body and blood of your Savior, of God incarnate. And you just know this. Like it's not a weird belief. It's something, and it's not. There's also an important way in which it's not fantastical either. This is the divine context in which all meaning makes sense. Your life makes sense because there's a way for you to do something that is meaningful. You can follow the laws of the Lord. And not just the material Lord, but of God. As interpreted through the church, and this was a manipulation structure, but there's meaning. This is just the baseline. You don't even question it. And one of the big shakeup problems that happened, I don't think Vervaeke talked about this, but it strikes me as pretty obvious when you look through the arc of history. One of the big problems with the Black Death was that the clergy were killed just as readily as the rest of the people. But that's weird. That's not supposed to happen. Why did God kill off so many monks and priests? That's kind of weird. Is there something wrong with the church? It's not a coincidence that the Reformation happened after the Black Death. Like there's a whole bunch of shakeup that continue. There's a bunch of other factors that go into that. The history is complicated, and humans are complicated. But it's worth bearing in mind that compared to what the Western roots were, we don't have reliable ways of making meaning. You cannot be Christian today the same way you could have been Christian 1,000 years ago in Europe. Because what it means to be Christian today is as opposed to all of these other ideologies you encounter all the time. And which version of Christian are you going to be? Right? There isn't a baseline assumption of certainty of this is how we make meaning. So because of that, and because there's a really deep need for human beings to be able to make meaning, there's a whole lot of complicated reasons for that, and frankly, I don't think anyone really knows, but we have some pretty good guesses. This puts us in a position where we, roughly speaking, because of this global mimetic war, every meaning-making method gets destroyed. Every meaning-making method gets attacked. So you have a couple of choices. One is to live a life without meaning. It's kind of horrific. This is the problem of nihilism that Friedrich Nietzsche was trying to grapple. God is dead and we have killed him. How shall we grapple with being the greatest murderers that have ever existed, that ever could exist? That's where that whole God is dead quote was coming from. Nietzsche's saying, how do we deal with this? So, that's one option, is you look it in the face and you stare into the abyss and you hope something makes sense. This is particularly difficult in a scientific materialist paradigm. Like, why are we here? Well, by pure accident, and it doesn't matter, and when you die, you're just gone. There is no meaning. But you can sort of ignore that fact and enjoy learning some things while you're here, whatever that means. The scientific materialist paradigm is absolute complete garbage when it comes to being a framework for making meaning on the human level, at the level of what we might want to call the heart or the soul, by saying there isn't one. That's hard to work with. The other approach is to grab onto a meaning-making method and refuse to look at anything that could challenge that frame so that you can be in this meaning-making bubble and have the experience of meaning in a way that can defend against the assaults from the other memeplexes, from the other clusters of ideas, the other ideologies, the other paradigms. Approximately speaking, this is one of the things that happened with scientific materialism. It has a whole bunch of immune responses to dealing with spiritual meaningfulness, which is one of the reasons why the entire interaction between the scientific community and the area of research in parapsychology is just, it's insane. It does not make sense in terms of, it doesn't make sense in terms of if you're actually trying to understand how the world works. Even if they end up being correct to reject parapsychology, they're not generally rejecting it for the right reasons. Their reasons are completely borked, and if they had attended to the fact that their reasons were borked, they could have anticipated the replication crisis. So, but the reasons they reject it make sense from a mimetic perspective, because there's a way where if you have a way of making meaning by, oh, well, I'm discovering things about the universe, and that has meaning. Why? Well, I won't ask that question too deeply because I don't want to look into the abyss. But you compare that to things like the religious frames, where, okay, if you're a born-again Christian, part of what that means is you have realized a spiritual experience that you can make meaning out of using this framework, and then you clutch it for dear life because that feels so much better and so much more right than the thing that is able to build skyscrapers and put men on the moon. But let's not look at that too carefully. But actually science fits within this, like, how does it fit? Well, it's God's will. It's actually God's will. And I can find ways to rationalize, like, it's building a mental immune system. So the reason I go through all of that is because one of the big problems that shows up with activism is that it is a form of giving people the experience of meaning in their lives that they are otherwise devoid of, and is actively being destroyed by the global mimetic war. So there's this huge issue where part of the engine behind environmentalism isn't that the environment needs saving. It's that each of the people, and I don't know how general this is, but I think it's pretty widespread, a lot of the people who are environmental activists, and this is not unique to environmentalism, but this is just an example, a lot of environmental activists are in it because they're saving the world. And it gives meaning to their lives. It gives this sensation. It feeds the whole rescuer framework. I am participating in saving the world. I'm being a good person. It's actually borrowing from a bunch of the Christian redemptive narrative that is part of the groundwater of Western culture. This is how, like, instead of participating in environmentalism, if you went back about 2,000 years, the word would have been agape. I am participating in agape. I am participating in the in God's universal love that is the transformative grace that has the capacity to turn something into a more evolved form. The example that Vervaeke gives is that agape is the kind of love that a parent has for their child. You don't love the child because you want to eat them or mate with them. You don't love the child because there's a friendship tone, like you're expecting to get things from them. You love the child as a pure expression of being, and that love transforms the child into a person. Not because you're expecting something back, although sometimes people do that, and when they do that, the love feels corrupted, right? But but purely because you are participating in the flow of this kind of universal love, this selfless love, as a matter of transforming the world into something better. That's not part of the narrative most parents have, but it is part of the background of our 2,000-year-old Christian heritage, that God loves me agapically, and that transforms me. And the way that God does that is through the pathway by which I open my capacity to agapically love the world. So God agapically loves the world through me, and by doing so, I am participating in God's plan. That's a huge arc of meaning making that underlies our whole narratives around redemption. So when you're looking at something like activism for feminism, or for environmentalism, or for black rights, or for when dealing with ableism, it's not that the content is mistaken. This isn't a claim about the intellectual content. Again, it comes back to this question of what's the motivation? What's the why that is causing the person to lean in? And in an enormous number of cases, the reason is it gives that person meaning that they don't know how to get in another way. It gives them something to participate in that gives them a feeling of meaningfulness. That's not bad. It's just that if they aren't conscious that that's why they're doing it, then they're going to defend the content as they perceive it, the same way that a born-again Christian is going to defend the content of their beliefs in a way that is not meant to come to the right answer, but is instead meant to defend their capacity to make meaning. Until we address that, most activism it has a really basic problem that isn't going to be fixed by being more energetic about it or by being clearer about it. It doesn't matter. It can't matter. So, that said, there is something about, well, where are we in the process of being able to realize that? Where we are is perfect. And what it looks like at this stage is some people are activists. And some people are playing out, making meaning by yelling at corporations or protesting or dumping sugar in the gas tanks of bulldozers. That's part of the process. Just like toddlers need to throw tantrums. It's just part of the process. It's part of growing up as a species. It just seems really important in this particular case to notice what the big picture is to the extent that we can, because that growing up process is a process of noticing. So, I'm noticing I'm back a few comments here. Let's see. So David says, sufficient existential inflammation to become a coagulation of collective will that reminds us who we forgot we are. Wisdom cultivation via Vervaeke. Yeah, some cool reference. When you come to a fork in the road, tune it. For those who don't know, this is, I believe, a reference to if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him, which is a cute Buddhist teaching that's put in a provocative way. He says, karma is determined on the pinhead of motivation. Absolutely, yeah. And David adds, David Swedlow adds, well-meaning humans try to save the Earth, and Mama Earth says, enough with the saving, simply tell me about your adventure. Yeah. Yeah. So we bring this all the way back. By we, I mean I. Bring this all the way back to the beginning and highlighting, yeah. So for me, one of the big growth arcs, maybe the growth arc, maybe this is all it is, maybe this is all it has ever been, is really taking in, oh, every movement, everything I do can either be about me becoming more conscious or me becoming less conscious. And all I can work on is me. When I pretend that I can make other people do anything in a way that is outside of me, I play into becoming less conscious. That doesn't mean my compassion can't matter. It doesn't mean I can't affect others. But it does mean that if I try to lean into my thoughts about how to affect others, I get lost. And even in the energy of this, I notice I'm leaning into, let me convey this so that you get this message. Like that's part of that dirt I'm talking about. This is my edge. I keep trying to track, how do I reveal what I'm experiencing clearly as part of cleaning out my own junk. And my impression is, this is like one of these models that lands in my hands and I go, well, that's cool, and I like this, and this is yummy. This is like, I like cake. That's a true thing. It's part of my consciousness. I like certain kinds of cake. It's yummy. I like being able to share what I experience and know in ways that turn out to be helpful for people. That to me is really delightful. It's totally egoic. Absolutely. And I'm not as much a fan of bashing on the ego as a whole lot of spiritual teachings are. I'd rather have the ego have a nice time with spiritual growth. Maybe some hard times too, but sort of like keeping an eye on the horizon of, you know what would be awesome is being me, being really me, and really conscious. That's what I want. I don't want to escape from this life. I want to really live it. So holding that, I really like when I can share things clearly and cleanly, and it ends up helping other people. And it seems like if I just focus on me, it seems to land better for others. And then this exciting picture pops to mind. Oh, And that, I can see why that actually has a shot at healing the world. Because if I can speak clearly about what it's actually like for me to prioritize my own awareness, and I can embody it, and that embodiment can feel clear, others may pick it up and they'll amplify that same signal in their own way. And then this whole picture about mimetic infection via clarifying memes instead of the confusing ones, like this wildfire spread of consciousness, that actually becomes possible. But as soon as I start leaning into, oh, let me make that happen, then I get in the way and I'm trying to manipulate. And then it doesn't work. So what that means in practice, this is super hard. This is like the edge for me, absolutely, is seeing this picture, but not using it to change where I place my focus. Integrating the seeing of this global picture with how I live my life. I don't quite know how to do it, but I know how to come to how to do it. I'm in that process, which is actually just being me and really living this life, embodying it, and finding that I want to show up and do these live streams. And coming from an ever cleaner place, more and more clean over time. And that is it, and that is for me. If I can see, oh, that is for me, so that I can have the joy of this life more fully. If I can see how it really is for me, it's not about me fulfilling a duty. It's not about me affecting other people. It's about me really living my life. It means that all of my selfish motivations, all of my desire to be seen and shine and so on, all of that gets addressed. And over time, this actually becomes something that can help the world. But how do I hold that without corrupting it? I don't know. But I know that this is a lot more promising, and I can feel the solution coming, the lived solution. And it's much more promising than anything else I have ever seen or heard, including my own ideas from the past. It is much more promising. And it's actually, I think this is the natural conclusion, like the natural, not the conclusion, but the natural direction from the wise knowing theories I was talking about back in August, highlighting, well, what does it actually mean to embody clarifying means, to shift to this new mimetic operating system? It's not understood, it's lived. So what it means is, if I really believe in that picture, that means I've got to live it. Which means that it can't be about making this picture clear to others. It's got to be about making it clear to myself. Okay. Daniel Blanc says, there is already some true values in people without meaningish memes. The real altruism is inside us all along. The goal is to follow that and all the meaningish memes good-hearted. I think there's truth to that. Yeah. I've discovered that meaning making is actually an immense inner power. It's absolutely an inner power. It's something like I can craft meaning making systems quite readily now. It's and it gives me an enormous freedom. I don't believe any meaning making system now. I feel enormously free from them. But I can wear them and I can live them. Like probably the weirdest one for me has been diving into astrology, of all things. Like being able to live the perspective in which astrology has some power to it without letting it take any root in my belief system. Like that's a fascinating experience. It's a fascinating experience. It's definitely strange for my sense of self and my sense of how I want to be seen. Doing that brings up all kinds of fears about how I'm seen, which is wonderful because that's the dirt. That's part of the dirt. Oh no, other people might see me wrongly. That pain is there so that I will try to manipulate other people's perceptions of me by changing how I present myself. Okay. okay, how about I just not? That's not what I'm for. But the point is not actually about astrology. The point is that the ability to go in a direction that is as dramatically different from scientific materialism as astrology. Okay? Being able to wear both of these, and a bunch of others, these are just two examples I'm grabbing of a whole host of them, but being able to go through a whole bunch of them gives me the sense of, well, but what about when I'm just not wearing any of them, and I'm just looking at this? I can feel the power to create those frames. And the result is that when one of these meaning-making frames ends up getting demolished, or a different one claims certitude, like the way the scientific paradigm keeps coming forward with the claim, no, this is the truth of reality. We'll ignore the question of how they could possibly know that, like where the mathematics they're basing their models on comes from, how you deal with the loop of, I am conscious of these theories, which is how I know about them. But these theories supposedly explain consciousness. How do I know that's right before using consciousness? It's interesting how uninteresting that question is. So, but ignoring the Gödelian loopholes in those paradigms, there's like, okay, well, they can claim whatever they want to, and maybe they're right. Maybe we live in a mechanical universe all the way down. I don't see how that's plausible, but that's just a fact about me. And like looking at all that, I don't care on a deep level because these are tools. They're just tools. They're tools my mind uses in order to help me navigate this strange existence, this fascinating thing where I find myself conscious. I find myself alive, experiencing the flow of time. This is really weird. We don't normally think of it as weird. It's like, well, compared to what? Compared to all of the other possibilities. Like here I'm showing some of my some of my more strange transcendental experiences a little bit of like, having experienced utter non-consciousness and being out of time a few times, whatever that means. This is really fascinating, this experience here. So, and I find that from that position where I am free to make meaning or live without a meaning-making framework and just revel in this, that one of the most powerful things that comes through is a deep love and compassion for everyone. And it's very easy for the dirt in me to twist that around, like wanting to claim something of, oh yes, and spiritual teachings talk about like how you come to like universal love, and that's like a high point. So look at how spiritually advanced I am, and or me thinking, oh, I want to be a loving person. Oh, let me love you, and like I just splat on the mud. So it's slippery. This is another edge for me. It's a little separate from the original edge I was talking about, but it's closely related. But it's very much there. My impression is that we don't have to live in a meaning-making framework in order to have deep compassion for one another in a way that I think would do really good things for the world. And, again, that's about the system. How do I relate to my perception of the system? I pay attention to me. I pay attention to my experience, how clear I am, and how much I am loving this life. And that's what I find works. And Daniel Blanc asks, how do we tell if it's being good-hearted, though? Not with the mind. Not with the mind. I'm not going to get this through thoughts. I'm not going to get it through analysis. I'm not going to get it through having a better model. The mind holds these frames. It's always corruptible. It can always be good-hearted. What tells you whether, well, I'm making that slip again, right? It's so tricky because I see so much that I don't want to abandon myself here. Every instance of good hearting I have successfully noticed in myself has always been clear at what I've been calling the energetic level. I can feel it. It's the level at which I know when I always know when I'm posturing. I always know when I'm trying to impress an audience. But I don't always consciously register that knowing. When I'm trying to be a little extra impactful and I'm putting in a bit more energy and I'm trying to create this compelling picture, sometimes that's just theatricism and I enjoy it. Like there, that was very conscious. But I can put in this extra bit that's actually coming from a worry of, am I impressing them? I want to be liked. How do I amaze them? How do I dazzle them? And then that'll get me likes and it'll get people to react and people will talk about it. And that only works if I'm not paying attention. But I know, even when I'm not paying attention, there's something in my gut, there's something in me that knows that I'm kind of bullshitting myself and I'm kind of bullshitting my audience when I do that. That knowing, I find when I listen to it, good hearting gets no traction. None. The mind can't do that. Because no matter what, the mind is basically a set of programs, or rather it's the context that holds the programs. The mind's like a computer, and it doesn't matter what programs you write in the mind. The programs are still using some kind of metric to approximate the truth in order to track, is this good hearting? And as long as they're using metrics that aren't the truth, those programs can be good-hearted. But you can't good-heart the truth. So what's true? Maybe I'm just very cleverly deluded about that, but I'm not. What I want to say is I want to acknowledge that a mind that is scared of good hearting and is trying to account for it can recognize that what I am saying sounds like just another program, and that also sounds good-heartable. And that doesn't sound like it can actually address the issue. And what I want to say is, that's never going to work. What tells you that good hearting even exists? How do you know good hearting even exists? The level at which you can know good hearting, that level you can know whether you're good hearting. I think it's that simple. But that doesn't make it easy. And there I slipped again, but hopefully you can translate through the bit of dust that poofed into that communication. Okay. This is certainly energizing. Thank you everyone for popping on, for engaging. I really appreciate the comments and the feedback and the bits of pushback. Everything, well, I say, hey, everything is welcome, but that's a true statement I make to existence. Everything is welcome. I have clear boundaries. I don't want to be fixed. But they're clear boundaries. I'm not trying to say too much. I really enjoy these bits of interaction. They're very pleasing to me. So thank you for the gift of offering this. And I hope you enjoyed this. Good night.